Welcome to my talk. It's on data and analytics in a digital performance agency. So before we go into sort of what this whole thing's about, let's just give a brief introduction in terms of who I am and what I do at C3. So my name's Alan. I like playing with numbers a lot more than I do play with words. And my role here at C3 is to deal with all of the data, tech, insights and integration. And those are my contact details if you ever want to hit me up afterwards. So what am I going to talk about today? I'm going to give you a brief glimpse in terms of what our role in terms of the data team is in terms of C3 and in terms of agency life. And what I'll do then is I'm going to split that up into sort of areas and teams that you tend to sort of find yourself working with a lot. For this presentation, I've chosen 3 core teams that I tend to work with day in, day out. And these are the PR, paid and SEO teams. What I've done is, through my years of experience with working with these teams, is pulled out certain personality traits for these separate teams. And what I'd like to say first and foremost is that these are aggregated personality traits, and if they represent any particular person that I'm currently working with, I'd like to say that it's actually purely by coincidence. So if we take the PR team, for example, I'm going to label him PR Donny. Now, working with PR Donny, here are some of the sort of traits that you can experience with working with the PR team. They're generally really quick. They probably talk really fast as well. And they're probably on to the next idea before you've even worked out the first one. Usually when they say things like, things aren't urgent, they generally mean they probably need it by tomorrow morning. And if they weren't working in PR, they'd probably be a fairly good stand-up comedian. So those are sort of like traits that you probably work with. But how's he or she like to deal with the data? You know, what do they like to do? What do they like to see? PR people like their data to be easy to digest, most likely in simple table, and they work in Google Sheets a lot. They love visualization in terms of Data Studio, and they also like mining the web for data. But definitely that they like visual data. That's their core. That's what they go back to. So what does it look like working day to day with a team? For the next part of this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through some examples, some real life examples of what we've done in the past few months working with the PR team. Examples such as this, how this is postcode data, and the question is, this is boring. I mean, what can we do with this sort of data to make it interesting, and what can you do with this data to make it exciting for the PR, the visual people? So you need to represent it in a visual way. So this is what you can do, and this is something you can probably do with tools that you've actually got access to already. So this is that same postcode information visualized for the PR teams. Looks really complicated, but it's really visual, and it helps you to sort of portray the information in a really sort of visual way, and they love this sort of stuff. But how do you actually do something like this in terms of, does it take a lot of dev resource? Does it take a lot of time to do? Not really. You've probably got that tool in your arsenal already, and it's Excel. Something that you're probably not used in it, apart from using it for spreadsheets. If you investigate it a bit more, under the insert option or insert menu, that previous map was done using a 3D maps function, and there's a whole host of different ways that you can actually visualize the data within the platform. Excel's come a really long way since sort of years ago, basically. Other stuff that you can do that's pretty cool on Excel now is like previous stuff that we talked about was postcode data. So you needed to know latitude, longitude data. And again, that sort of stuff you can pull directly from Excel as well. The previous bits of information are actually pulled using the data menu. And if you go to geography, there's a whole host of different metrics you can pull for city information, population information. It's definitely worth checking out. But as I said, there's a lot hiding in Excel that you probably just weren't aware of. On to something else with working with PR team. PR teams like to come up with a lot of ideas. And to fuel those ideas, you need to come up with a lot of data for it. Some examples of this is how you come up with a campaign that requires some sort of information for films. And the question becomes, I need some IMDb data. I need to pull a lot of data for IMDb. You could actually go away, spend a lot of resource or use a lot of people to manually pull that data. But you don't have time for that. You need the data now. You need it sort of quickly. So what we did was we built a tool to do it. This is something that was built in Excel using VBA, and it's something that I'll probably come back to time and time again, is using tools that sort of readily available to do this sort of stuff, rather than have to spend a huge amount of time and resource developing using development resource. So what's to summarize, working with the PR team, I would say you need to be quick. You don't want to waffle. Yes, no answers are probably preferable, but you need to be succinct in your answers to the PRs. If we move on to sort of working with your SEO teams now, I'm going to label this guy SEO Sunny. What's it like working with your SEOs? SEOs are a completely different breed to your PR team when you're working with them. They're mostly calm, fairly considered in terms of their approach, very methodical, probably really technical as well, and they probably like to drink Coke a lot. It's just one of the traits that you tend to find with SEOs. And with these guys, the more data, the better. But how do they like the data? How do they interact with it? For an SEO, integration's everything. If you could integrate all of the tools into one tool set, they would take that any day. And they probably like to work in Excel a lot, and they hide in analytics. They definitely like to crawl, and they always want a faster way of doing everything. So if you're interacting with the team, you're gonna be asked to crawl. So just some examples of what we've done in the past few months with regards to this, and some sort of tips. If you talk about crawls, you're going to come across certain tools. Screaming Frog is probably a staple of your crawling tools if you've been in SEO for a while. Web Harvey is another type of crawling tool that has its own unique benefits. And I'll run through some tips of these two different types of tool sets that we've used recently. So Web Harvey, if you've not used or come across it before, is a slightly different type of tool. It still can crawl and mine data. However, it's a bit more visual and human-like in terms of its interactions. For if you're crawling a website that requires a sort of human interaction element to it, little clicks to be able to bypass certain bits of information blocks, Web Harvey is probably a tool you probably want to investigate. It's more visual. You can highlight certain areas that you want to extract information for, and it's fairly intuitive to use. Screaming Frog, as I said, if you worked in SEO, Screaming Frog is one of those tools that have just been around for a really long time. And to crawl it is people use the tool for crawling. But if you were trying to extract certain bits of information out of websites, you'll probably come across using several different functions for it. For CSS paths functions and XPath functions, when you're using Screaming Frog for extracting data, you can actually use Chrome to visually inspect the code to see which bits that you want to extract. And there is the copy selector and copy XPath functions to be able to extract that sort of data. Using Screaming Frog. One top tip I can give, or actually two top tips really, is if you find that your sites aren't crawling with Screaming Frog, or if you find that it only crawls one link and then it stops, you may want to investigate changing the user agent for it. There may be certain blocks on certain user agents on that website, and you may want to try changing the rendering engine to use a JavaScript rendering engine to see if it actually gets past that sort of that block. And SEOs love to work in Excel. That's any true SEOs, they definitely work in Excel. So one of the tools that I really love that integrate well with this is the SEO toolset for Excel. And if you've not used this, I definitely urge you to spend some time. It's a huge time saver, and it's something that would save you a lot of time going out into different sort of platforms, different sort of websites to grab that data, then probably import it back into Excel to use again. Definitely one to check out. And what you'll also find SEOs doing a lot is reporting, and in some cases clients use Google Sheets for reporting. Most of the times Google Sheets is messy. If you're an agency and using Google Sheets, there may be a number of different columns in there that you're tracking for internal use. In this example, I've got we're tracking sessions and when links were live, what the link categories were for a sort of internal monitoring. That sort of information you probably don't want to share with your clients. With Google Sheets, you can use the import range function to be able to limit sort of how much information you want to share with the client. In this example, basically you've limited the information from column B to I, so you don't actually share the extra internal information for what you're monitoring internally for that client report. So that's it for working with SEOs. It's a brief example of what you tend to work with. If you could integrate everything for an SEO, you would do that. That's the whole ethos, is to try and get things done as quickly as possible. So that the third sort of character that we tend to interact with a lot in terms of the team is Paypenny. And Paypenny is super numbers focused. You've got to be prepared to and be armed with the facts when you go and talk to her. And they love acronyms. They probably invent a new acronym to you when you go and talk to them next time around. And they probably like coffee a lot. All pay people like coffee. So how do you like the data? Now, the pay team is a super numbers driven team. They like their dashboards, they like their automation. They get super excited about any tools that you're building for them. They definitely love Google Scripts. They're always all over Google Scripts. And as I said, you need to show them the numbers when you're speaking to paid people. Graphs by themselves, they don't quite cut it with your paid teams. And if you can even talk about attribution, audiences, keywords, you'll be their best buddy. So one thing I've learned working with our paid team here at C3 is that Facebook and Google make it as hard as possible to be able to integrate any of the data together. They just want to trip you up. Now, one of the recent examples of this is trying to import customer data, not customer data, performance metrics from Facebook into Search Ads 360. What we basically had to do is come up with our own sort of workflow, a process flow to be able to do this. You could export a CSV file from Facebook and import it into Search Ads 360 manually, do that every day. But even the exports from Facebook and email, they don't make it simple. They don't do the attachments on as CSVs. They need you to click a link to be able to download the attachments. So it's a huge time sink, and nobody realistically would want to do that on a day-to-day basis. So what we've done is we've created that Facebook report using Supermetrics. Supermetrics is an awesome tool. If you haven't used it or haven't used it before, or don't know about it, definitely look it up. Once that report runs on a scheduled basis, we use a script to then email that information across to an email inbox. We then use a tool called Power Automate, which is part of your Microsoft stack in terms of your automation flows, to intercept that email and upload it to Search Ads 360 via FTP. So just to break that down a little bit in terms of what that looks like. Supermetrics, as I said, awesome tool. Definitely want to check it out. You create your report. There are certain metrics that you need to include in this report. Generally, Supermetrics has all of those. However, there's 3 final columns that you need to customize to make it actually work properly. Your amount spent, reporting starts and reporting ends. Those columns don't exist in any Supermetrics export, so you have to code them in manually using scripts. So we wrote a script for doing that. And once that's done, so that then comes in every day, it reprocesses, gets the latest metrics. Once that process runs, we've got another script that runs to be able to then send the information via email to the appropriate mailbox. I've renamed, you can come in here and change the file name, the email recipient, and your subjects and any subject body. But what happens after that runs is then this script then triggers and it sends the email of that sheet to a data inbox. So once that data inbox is populated, so the email comes in and you have the attachment, this is where the Power Automate tool comes in. It's one of the more hidden functions of the Microsoft stack. It's probably not something you come across day to day unless you go looking for it. And what this does is it has a whole automation flow that we've built into it that takes that email and checks the attachment name to make sure that it's the right attachment. And if it is, what it then does is it hooks up to our SharePoint and creates a file for logging purposes. It then reads that file and uploads that information via FTP to Search Ads, moves the file out, creates a log file, and closes off that functionality. So we had to go through all of that to be able to upload the data manually, automatically to the Search Ads account. Why they can make that easier, I don't know. So in terms of dashboards, then, paid teams love dashboards. They're in it day in, day out, budget pacing, a whole load of dashboards. Again, at some point, you're going to need to aggregate up data. The Google Data Studio stack is actually fairly good in terms of what it can provide, but there's at times where you have to aggregate data up using Google Sheets. And again, as I said, Supermetrics is awesome at doing this. One tip that I can give you with using Supermetrics in this sort of format is the ability to use dynamic dates. So there's a now function in Google Sheets, and if you look at your Google Sheets tabs in terms of the raw tabs, what you'll find is the Supermetrics tab as a hidden sheet. In there, if you hook up the end date as a dynamic end date using the now function, you can, when you automatically sort of run that on a scheduled basis, that will update it with your latest date. So you'll always get the latest time frame for your data when it refreshes. And a final thing to note with working with paid team, PPC team in particular, is they love keywords. And as good as Keyword Planner is to prospect and look for ideas for keywords, there are better tools out there that can help you do this. Just some examples here to probably investigate in your time is keywordtool.io. This is particularly sort of interesting in that it tries to give you information for search volumes, so YouTube, for example, Amazon, eBay. Sometimes it's a little bit dubious in terms of the data, if I'm really honest, but nevertheless, it's there. It's something to investigate. And another one I'd like to bring up is the topics platform in SEO Monitor. This is actually, if you serve it a topic, it will give you back a group of keywords that is actually sort of aggregated together as part of that group. And it also gives you competition in terms of competitors, who's bidding around that space. What I will say is that these tools are more focused towards your organic, your SEOs in terms of usage, but they are slowly beginning to make it a bit more user-friendly for your paid teams. So what we learned on this data journey, we've talked about sort of how there's many different types of personalities in terms of working with different teams in an agency setting. I've focused on agency life, but realistically, if you work in-house, you probably can find synergies in terms of what I've said in terms of working with the different types of teams. And I guess the important thing is, you as the data guy or data girl in a business, your whole remit is to be able to make the data accessible and easy to understand for your intended audience. And that's probably one of your key drivers that you need to sort of focus on. Is that you need to make the data in a format that your audience can relate to. And that brings on to sort of my first observation in this. We've talked a lot about sort of developing in VBA and scripts, and one of the key things that I've found working agency side is that you always want to work and develop in platforms that people like to work in. And it's super important. It's like if you break that workflow, you affect the adoption rates in terms of any tools, you affect that sort of translation of how that data sort of comes across to whoever it is that you're talking to. And inevitably at some point in your journey, you'll create a tool that's so awesome that the higher powers that be sort of start thinking, should you make this into a more developed tool, involve the development teams to help build a more spec'd out tool. Got to be wary of that. Just from experience, about 50% of the time, if you involve development in terms of building tools, it's probably not going to turn out like how you envisaged. The problem is, marketing teams, development teams, they work to two totally different briefs. Your development teams are probably more interested in terms of functional specs and technical specifications, and usability in terms of how people are interacting with that data is probably not that high on their agenda. So things get taken off in a tangent. So always be wary of that. Usually things take a lot longer as well. So something to bear in mind when you're thinking of whether you want to take a tool to be developed. So just on some sort of closing remarks then, you're probably asked a lot, the data team here is really integrated with the rest of the business. We interact with everyone really in terms of the C3. And it can probably get to the point where people are just expecting that, you'll have all the answers. And what I would say to that is, it's definitely okay to not have all the answers. No one can have all the answers, right? But in an agency setting, what I have to say is, you just need to be really good at finding them. So, yeah. Thanks very much for your time. Any questions? Hit me up on my contacts.